With our Model So low poly, I'm going to show you just a little bit about texture painting. I'm not going to use screencast keys. It's just really not necessary because there's not a lot to show you past edit mode. You don't have to go to the UV workspace, but just to show you how it's unwrapped. And I just went down the center on the outside and on the inside of the leg. So right there and on top. Now you don't need to split the window here. This is the shader editor, but it's kind of common practice. You can set up your Blender any way you want. And I do like having the node editor here, even for texture painting workspace. Okay, so once you've got your model UV unwrapped, come to texture paint workstation. And the only difference between your layout and mine is I have the shader node right here, the node editor. So if I want to add a node, it's right there. And it makes it easy for you to bake, and you can make sure the proper node is selected. Okay. All right. So what is texture painting? Texture painting is one way to get color or texture onto your model. You can either paint it directly in a 3D viewport or in the image editor / UV editor. Yeah, they're kind of like one and the same, but then again, they're kind of different as well. Right now, the model has a magenta color. That means we don't have anything going on. So one of the easiest ways to add a layer, I guess you can say, or a channel, is to go up here to texture slots, drop down, just leave it on material. It says no textures. We hit the plus button, and I'm just going to go for a base color. Just click that, give it a name. So I'm just going to leave it like that, whatever name I had it. I'm going to left drag down to select both of those and just type in 2048. Then left click over here to get rid of that highlight. I'm just going to leave it at everything that's default here. Now your color is going to be different. My color is this. For some reason, yours may be black, but don't worry about it. Well, matter of fact, I'll just change it to black and then hit add. Now what that does is when you go through the texture slots, that immediately adds it to the shader editor. So it just says material right here. You can probably rename this, but the most important thing is it adds the image texture node in here for us, and it adds it in the UV editor. So it says it right up here. Now, when you're working with multiple image textures, multiple slots and stuff like that, what you want to do is make sure it's either selected up here with the drop down, or here, or here. So you have three options. And sometimes, you may start painting on what you think is one layer, but it's not. So you just have to make sure the proper layer is selected, or the proper channel, or whatever you want to call them. Okay, so when you make a stroke, now I'm not going to make a stroke right now. And by the way, to make a stroke, all you do is just left click and drag. Okay, left drag. So when you make a stroke, one important thing to remember is whatever brush you choose, that's pretty much going to determine whether you make a stroke or not. So if I'm on brush, I can make a stroke. If I'm on blur, it won't make a stroke. It would just blur the boundaries out. So it won't make a mark, basically. Smear will not make a mark. Clone, fill, mask, etc. These do not make marks. So what you have to do is make sure you are on brush. And you see it comes up here and down here. If I choose blur, it's going to go down there. You got paint hard, which is the brush that will leave a mark. and this other one pressure or something, or whatever it is. Just know the difference between the brushes that will leave a mark and the ones that won't. So you can see for some reason this color went to red, and it may not be default, but that's fine. So you can just go down here to the wheel here and just change the color any way you see fit. I'll just leave it, I'll just put it over there, something like that. That's fine. And let's see here. Now, when you want to make your color palettes, all your various colors, you come down here to the color palette right here, hit new. You can name it whatever you want to, and whatever color is selected here is going to show up when you hit the plus sign. And yes, the UI can be a little bit convoluted. So you have to kind of, do a little bit of run around here, there. That's just how it is. Okay, we can change the color, something else, then hit plus. Change it to something else, then hit plus. Now, whatever color you want, be sure it's selected down here. Also, what you can do is you can switch between the first two colors by hitting X, 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 blue, X, X, X. So now with this white, I could just select that right there. And now it's red and blue, X, 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 to switch between those two. Now you won't be able to switch between your entire color palette. If there is a way, I don't know what that is. Now you can change the brush size, like scope mode, and the strength, same thing. And you have the X-symmetry here. But there is another way you can set up your texture paint node. You can also just X out of that, and with this clear, you can just hit new and rename it whatever you want to. It's going to call it TP semicolon test. And I'm going to left drag that down, same size, 2K. Then I'm just going to change the color to a UV grid or a color grid. I'm just going to pick UV grid. These UV grids and color grids are for you to learn about textile density, but I'm not going to get into that right now. It's pretty easy. Don't worry about it. Then I'm just going to hit new image, and there it is. So what I can do is add a new image texture node or use this one, but I don't like doing that personally. I just like having them separate. Oh my goodness, these new thumbnails that Blender came up with is just outstanding. So I'm gonna add a new image texture node and change that to this one right here. Now this is really amazing how the texture is showing up, but it's not connected to the node. That's really interesting. It's just based on the selecting the node. And you see how it changes up there in the UV editor. Okay. So just keep that in mind. So if you are familiar with layers of like GIMP, Krita, Photoshop, PaintShop Pro, the layering system in Blender is not the same. So we have one layer here and we have another layer here, but it's just not connected to anything. And this layer can connect into the principal BSDF via another node that will mix these two together. But anyway, that is another thing. Now this preview you see here, this is from a add-on, a paid add-on called Node Preview. It's really handy. Just lets you see what's going on when it comes to whatever you have in a node editor with every node you add. Now Blender does not save whatever you paint automatically. So when I make the first stroke, an asterisk will appear beside image. That is a reminder that you need to save the image. When you save, you can save in any kind of increment you want. You can save like every few brush strokes, etc., or just save it when you're completely done, just whatever you like. Okay, enough with that. Now we're going to texture paint. So I'm just going to hit X. Nope, not that X. That was Z, my bad. Change it to red so we can see it really, really good. And watch this. That is texture painting. In a nutshell. Very simple, easy. It can be challenging, do not get me wrong. But you see how easy this is. This is texture painting. Now I'm not going to go over every little brush and stroke with you. This is just so you can get used to the setup. And I showed you 2 different ways to set things up for texture painting. All right, once I made that, go up here, image, save as. And then, let's see, I'm just going to save it as that to the desktop, save it, and the asterisk is gone. Now we just want to give a quick look. Now you won't be able to see this, at least the full renderer, in texture paint mode. So what you have to do is go into cycles. Oops, sorry about that. So we got to go into object mode. Hit Z. You can try material preview. Get rid of that. Z. Try rendered. There we go. And of course you can add a light, stuff like that. And I'm in Eevee for the time being. We can switch it to cycles so you can take a look. And I have the viewport samples only at 11, but for something like this, I'll usually use five samples. So you see it goes fast, and all you just want to do is see what's going on. Then we go back to texture paint. Remember, I'm using Wazoo Power Menu. You can always change that stuff up here. Now I'm going to pick this one, our checker pattern, and I'm going to change colors. Let's go green for this. Make the brush bigger. Too big. And just do something just so it shows up. Tilde key and go back. Hit 3. Go to the side. And let's get in the inside of the legs. Make sure you get everything. And just a little bit there, right there. Make it kind of even. Like she's wearing trousers. That's fine. And just paint this up right here. No big deal. Uh-oh. Now I say that, but here I go. Very simple and easy. Now you can save this if you want to, but I'm just going to continue. Now I'm going to just choose another color, red. Now I'm going to paint over here. Now with this checker layout, we really can't see the mesh too well. You can see it somewhat now, but as long as you know what's going on, you should be fine. And if you want to avoid this checker pattern when you texture paint, feel free. Now to paint in the UV editor, you have to change this from view to paint. And you see all the settings come up from over here to over here. Now we can paint over here. And there we go. A basic UV painting in the 3D viewport and in the UV editor. That's saved. Now we can connect it to the Principled, and there we have it. Now I'm going to show you what you've been waiting for. How to texture paint images onto your 3D model. Now you can paint them in the 3D viewport or the image editor as well. The setup is the same. The initial setup is the same. You can do it manually here. I'm just going to do it manually. I'm just going to call this TP image. And you already saw the image earlier. I'm just going to give this a different color to make it distinctive. So you'll know. Going to put it at something yellowish. Everything's okay. Everything's all right. And hit new image. So that means I messed up somewhere. New. Yeah, it's still on grid. So let's change that to blank. And I'm just going to name it untitled texture paint image. That's fine. And now we just select that image right there. Make sure it's selected. Okay. Let me just move these around real quick. Get rid of that. Put it close. And you can see what an image preview does. Isn't that neat? And now we're going to add a image to this and texture paint the effects from an image. But first we need to make some adjustments. Brush settings. What we need to do is go down here to texture. Here we can add a new texture. New. And if you want to, you can name it the same thing you have up here. But I'm not going to worry about that. Just going to leave it at texture. Now we have to add the image. So we need to go here to this checkerboard. Then we hit open. And then we go for this one right here. 800 by 512. Open. There it is. It shows up there. Then we go back up here. Yeah. And we make sure we select the mapping to stencil. And then we make sure the image aspect is correct. But first, to make sure the image is in Blender, just hover your mouse in the 3D viewport. There it is. Then we hit image aspect, and that's a lot better. Okay. Before you make a stroke, make sure the color is white. Yeah, just make sure it's all white. To move the image in the 3D viewport, you need to hold the right mouse. Hold the right mouse. Hold it and then drag it around. Right mouse drag. Now, if you want to make it smaller, so shift, right mouse drag, that's going to make it bigger, smaller. Shift, right mouse drag. And if you hold control, that's going to be to rotate the image. Hold control, right mouse drag, rotate. Let go. So let's say your image is rotated like this and you try to get it back just the way it was and you probably can't. You can just go down here and just reset the angle. Just hit 0. Change the size like that, but you get some really interesting results right there that you can texture paint onto your model too. Just depends what you want to do. All right, so place your image into position. Remember, white needs to be selected and we make a stroke. And that is texture painting with an image. So with this image, at this resolution, 800 by 512, I'm doing pretty good with the texture. Because our image is lighter right here, a little bit darker along the edges, a little bit more redder. So you have to find you an area and stay within that area, really. And this is kind of the challenging part of texturing like this. Now I can probably stay within the area of the lightness of her skin. See, even if you just go off a little bit, it changes. So let me zoom in and I'll try to make this size appropriate. See how it's a little bit darker here than here. Let me just move this up. See how it is? Darker here, here, and light here. So you just have to be aware of that. Just the knuckles right there. And once again, save your image. Just going to get rid of this. And you can make it bigger so you can get more coverage. But your details are going to be washed out. But then again, they may be exactly what you're looking for. Tilde key. Let's go to back and let us rotate this that way so it's straight up. Doesn't matter which side, and let's see if we can get a little bit better coverage. You see that little speck right there? Maybe you see it, maybe you don't. I'll zoom in. See that little dark speck right there? That's from her skin. There's something there like a bump or something. Yeah, it's right there. As you can see, this is very fun. And this is an overall way to do this. Okay? Hit the 3 key, side, 7 key, top. So you see how it's a little bit darker right there. Save that. Let's switch this out. Let's take a look. I'm going to hook that in. Z. Go to material preview first. And, oh, I missed a spot. Oh, well. Go to material preview and just take a look. If not, just go to rendered. And there you have your image texture that you just texture painted onto your model. And that is texture painting with an image. Of course, there is more you can do, absolutely. But like I said, this is just a basic way to show you. And you can see how can I say this? How blotchy it is. Because when you get the image, when you see the image and start texture painting, it looks a different way. I mean, we can see some areas of characteristics of Charlie Red's skin, but it's kind of like not washed out as in bright, but it's just kind of washed away to a certain degree. It's kind of almost blurry. So to alleviate that, you would have to make that image a lot smaller and take your time. And I mean take your time. Because in the UV editor, you can see where the areas are blotchy, stuff like that. And that is I guess you can say a drawback of texture painting like this. If you can get real good at it, yeah, more power to you. That's different. So let us move the light, select it, Alt G, then G, Z, go zebra. Now we go yo-yo. This is cycles, by the way, and I'm just using CPU, no big deal. Select the bulb, and I'm going to change that to 11 for the power, so we can get some type of bit of diffuse look. You see how blotchy it is? See where the different regions of the image, or how I textured it, are sharp. You can clearly see the boundaries. So, if you often wonder why you see 3D characters painted in a solid way, this is probably why, because it's a little difficult to get good at. And believe me, I've been practicing this for a while. It's not impossible, but you really got to take some time to get a real even skin tone when you use the method we just used with the stencil. With our model so low poly, I'm going to show you how to practice something else which is going to be vital to your 3D journey, and that is baking. And baking is nothing more than fixing the effects you make in 3D space and putting them in a 2D space. It's basically just optimization. So the less nodes you have in the shader editor, the better. Now, the easiest way to bake something is to bake it from the vertex painting method. And vertex painting is nothing more than the easiest way to add color directly onto your model. You don't need to UV unwrap it. But to bake, yes, your model must be UV unwrapped. But when it comes to just basic vertex painting, you don't need to UV unwrap. So let's go into vertex paint mode. Now, I'm not going to go over all these settings for vertex painting. F, pretty much the same thing. Shift F, strength, pretty much the same thing as scope mode. So I'm going to change colors. It's going to go green. Have some type of color palette here. So if you're working with a low poly model like this, well, you're going to get these low poly results. If you want to add more geometry, then you can use a subsurface modifier. And unfortunately, I have to show you vertex painting so you can see the process of what I'm doing. You don't need to do anything fancy with this. So whatever color combination you come up with, just go ahead and paint that in. Okay, so now I'm sure you want to see how your vertex painting masterpiece came out in the 3D renderer. So let's hit Z, go to render, and we don't see anything. That's because the vertex paint colors are specifically connected to something called color attributes right down here. Go to color attributes, and there is the attribute right there. You can create new attributes. You can create a layering system, but I'm not going to go there. But the thing about it is you have to connect this node in the shader editor, and whatever you name it here has to be the same name of the node in the shader editor. Hit new. I'm just going to leave it named that material. Now let's go and add. Go to input, have attributes. You have color attribute right there. What we have to do is put in the name right here. But I think when you go to input attributes and you just use attribute node, the name is already there. So we go to color attributes, it's already here. So just plug it into the Principled BSDF or whatever shader you're using, and there you go. So right here, we can just, well, I just left clicked on that and left click on that. And you have a couple of options. Okay, so that's how you see vertex colors. Now, let's do this. So let's add in a image texture, because you must have a image texture to bake. So basically, everything here is going to bake onto here. All this color, well, not this, anything that's connected to the shader train, it's going to bake here. If it's not connected, don't worry about it. Make a new texture here or do it in the UV editor. So I'm just going to make one here. Title this VP semicolon test bake. Right there, I'll leave it at 1K, etc., etc. New image. Then we go to the UV editor, hit new. Nope, not new. Don't need new. Sorry about that. Select that one we just made here. And now for the settings to bake vertex color. Let's move this out. First, we must be in cycles as a 4.2.3 blender. Now you can choose CPU or GPU, doesn't matter. We scroll down, we go to the bake settings. Let me just collapse those. And here under bake type, since this is a diffuse type of bake, all we want is the diffuse type. So go down here and select diffuse. And when you select that, this gives you only 3 options. We don't want direct light, nor do we want indirect light. We only want the color. Before we hit bake, let us review. Here are the main ingredients to baking vertex colors and just baking in general. No matter what bake type you choose, or whether you bake from the multi-resolution modifier or the active to selected, aka high poly to low poly. So you need an image texture, don't forget, because this is where this information is going to. 2, you need your model UV unwrapped, and you need a UV material. And don't forget, you can shade your object smooth. And for the most part, at least for just this basic introduction to baking, that's all you need. You can adjust some settings down here, etc., etc., but we won't do that right now. Now for vertex painting, baking, you need to select the diffuse color from the bake type and disable direct and indirect. And keep color and then bake. You see the blue bar down here? There we go. That is your first bake. Most important thing to do is save your bakes. Now, what I'm doing with this section for baking is starting over every time. So we have the vertex test bake right there, vertex paint test, that is. And now we're going to get a little more involved with these bake settings. See how flexible Blender is? My goodness. UV editor, new, gonna call this bake, semicolon, diffuse, test. Gonna leave it at 1K, etc., etc. Leave everything else alone. New image, there we go. New, and leave that just like that. Bring this to the foreground. Okay, so now we just add the image, select it. Nope, not that. Base, diffuse. I know you can't see it too well, but don't worry about it. Okay, so what we want to do is choose one of the baking types, which will be, hold on a second, let me just put this up here. What we want to do is choose the baking type called diffuse. Now, with these bake types, these are special recipes. Each one has its own recipe in which you need to follow. Each one has its own ingredients in which if you don't get the proper ingredients, you're not going to get the effect. So with the diffuse bake, we need the most important node, the diffuse node. So add shader and find diffuse BSDF. You see, we have influence right there, same as baking the vertex paint. Disable that if you want to. And this is the direct and indirect light from the 3D viewport. Sorry, I didn't mention that earlier. And just bake. And there it is. Whatever you set up to this node, whatever additional nodes you set up, it's going to bake as diffuse. So let's bake something else under the diffuse umbrella. Let me zoom in, just X out of that, new, bake diffuse magic. So what I'm going to do is use a texture called the magic texture. Now you can use other textures if you want, but this node is seldom used, so I guess I'd use it. And all you got to do is just plug that in to the color. Not seeing anything right now because we need to be in material preview, and there we have it. Our node is selected and named. We have this set up correctly connected, and we have the bake type as diffuse. So let's hit bake, and you see that's working, and it worked up here. Now, did you notice I did not have the bake diffuse magic selected up here, but it still managed to bake? Sometimes that happens. Now I like to have this selected and it's selected here before I bake. So you just have to figure out a rhythm for you. Now I'm not going to bother saving this. This is relatively easy to get again. Now we're going to bake a final diffuse bake. So I'm going to rename this, X out of that, new. And when I mean bake an image, I mean something external. But first we have to get the image we want to bake. So I'm just going to use a random image. You don't have to worry about the aspect ratio of the image. So go to the folder wherever your image is. Mine is right there, etc., etc. And it comes in right there, and you see it's kind of squished. That's fine. We can disconnect the magic texture, get rid of it. Then we can just plug that into there, and it shows up right there. So if you want a challenge, why don't you go ahead and figure out what's the next step? So if you guessed the next step, we need to add in a image texture, because you don't want to bake on this. This is just solely to show the image to the diffuse shader so we can see it through the material output right there. What we want to do is select it here, and it's pretty much set. Now what I'm trying to do is not cram so much onto your brain. Now depending on what you bake, like the bake type, all these are going to have different recipes and ingredients and stuff, yeah. Also, they're going to have different color spaces you can pick and choose from. Let me go up. So sRGB is a standard for like anything almost color. And then you get non-color data. That's the standard for the normal maps, and a standard for displacement and other types of baking effects. Since this is color, I just keep it on sRGB. And with our setup, remember this is selected. It's not selected in here, but you can if you want to make sure everything is firing on all cylinders. And then make sure diffuse, direct, indirect, disabled, and just color, bake. And there we go. We have our baked image. The next bake type we're going to use is ambient occlusion. And this is the most important node you need in the ambient occlusion recipe. So just go up here to input and find it. And you can find all these other nodes that I will not show you how to get. You just have to look for them later. And ambient occlusion is basically, first, it is a computer generated effect. So you just set things up like we've been setting things up earlier. You don't have to change the color space. And for the time being, this is just going through the material preview or the material output. Sorry about that. And these settings will not be changed, at least for this demonstration. So the ambient occlusion effect, like to a certain degree, if you're looking at your computer, we can see some ambient occlusion in the node editor. Material output node, when you click away, it makes a shadow between the node and the background. That's kind of what ambient occlusion is, just only on your model. Now, with our model so low poly, and it's not enough like 90-degree angles like the corner of two walls meeting, it's not going to show up very well here. It may show up on the armpit, but there's another place it will show up. Cycles. And the first thing you want to do when you bake in ambient occlusion is change your render samples. Render, not the viewport. The final render samples. Mine is set to 33. That's too much for now. Just going to set it to 1. Then we change our bake settings, and you notice I'm in a different window. Ambient occlusion. And you can see we don't have a lot of settings to change. Clear image for any of these bakes. It means you can bake over the node. And you can just keep baking and keep baking. You know, you may have to bake something, ambient occlusion, 3 or 4 times before you find what you like, etc., etc. Now, ambient occlusion does take a lot out of your system. This is why this effect is so commonly baked. All right, with all that said, let's hit bake. That was quick. Now you see the result of 1 sample. So now I'm going to increase the samples to 22. And then hit bake again. And it just bakes over. And you see that's taking a little bit longer because we increased the samples, but guess what? We have a much smoother effect. Now what we're going to do is bake the high poly to low poly. But first we have to make some adjustments. So with the model already UV unwrapped, when we make a copy of this, those UVs are going to transfer to the copy. But remember, with this high poly model, you do not want to go into the UV editor in case you're working with way too many polygons. Now what we want to do is rename these. So I'm just going to title this one .hp for high poly, and this one .lp for low poly. So select high poly, subserve 4, and just hit apply. There we go. Now I don't know why that error message is down there, but as long as it doesn't get in the way, hide the high poly, just bring the low poly back. Just make sure it's still low poly, 1000 plus triangles. And what you want to do is make sure like both models are shaded smooth. So what I want to do first is select the high poly model and go to the node editor and just add a basic material to it. Just like that, that's fine. Now you won't need to go into the UV editor with this, don't forget. Okay, now that we've done that, now we hide the high poly, bring back the low poly, select the low poly, and we add another material to that as well. You can name it whatever you want. And you know the rest of the setup from here so far. Create something new. Select it to active, semicolon, low poly. I'm just going to leave everything default. And remember, with the low poly model selected, select it up here. There it is. Then we bring the high poly model back. The next thing we want to do is make sure we are selecting things properly. So what you need to do is look at this right here, the materials. So you see we have two materials here. Now hopefully you rename this high poly and low poly. I just did it like this just to be doing it. I know the top one is a high poly and the .001 material is low poly, so no big deal. Select the high poly first. Then we hold shift and select the low poly. But you see, it's still on the high poly shader material. We want to make sure it's on the low poly material. Always, always, always. Now with that done, then we can go to our bake settings. Now I'm not going to worry about samples or anything like that. We change it from combine to whatever you want. I'm just going to say normal. And select it to active right there. You have these additional settings, but I'm not going to really worry about that right now. But there is something very important you need to be aware of, is swizzle coordinates right here. Now the normal map that you can bake has different spaces, object space and tangent space. I'm not going to get into that, but tangent space is usually the default. But swizzle coordinates, we see swizzle RGB. Now, every render engine has its own swizzle coordinates, and this means how the normal map will be displayed. For Blender, you can see it's positive X, positive Y, positive Z. And you can change these if you want. You can change each one. So let me show you some additional proof that you will really need to know if you plan on exporting your normal maps out to other game engines. Let's go to text tools right there. This is an add-on that's free that you can get. It's not an extension, it's an add-on. It's just something that helps you bake, and it's really, really neat, really, really handy. But I want to show you this. Here you see it says swizzle coordinate. And here you see where it says DirectX is used in 3ds Max, CryEngine, Source, and Unreal Engine. And if we change it to OpenGL, we're going to see Blender, Maya, Modo, Toolbag, and Unity. Yeah, so you really need to be aware of this when it comes to exporting your work to different 3D engines. And now we go back to baking real quick, but let's go into object mode. So with all that said, let's just hit bake. And there it is. This is the classic and traditional selected to active method, or high poly to low poly bake. Okay, let's review. So with the high poly model, all you need is a shader material, something basic. It can be just this setup, or it can be some other node or some other nodes. It doesn't matter. But for the most part, you just need at least one node here. And you do not need to UV unwrap this. You don't even need to look at it in the UV editor, because this is a high poly model. It may be thousands of polygons on it. And your computer may not like that when you go into the UV editor with that much geometry. So I didn't mean to go off tangent. So say this again. Remember, for the high poly model, you only need a shader material. That's it. Now we select the low poly model. And of course, it needs to be UV unwrapped. Name it properly. It needs a shader material and a image texture node to bake to. And that's pretty much the simple formula. And don't forget, when you go to select the high poly model, hold Shift and then left click, and be sure that the node material is on the low poly one, whatever you named it. Just make sure it's on the proper setup, because this is what Blender sees to bake. It does not see this. This is in the background. It sees this. And then we can change some settings. Let's go extrusion, so we can kind of clear this normal map up. And you notice I'm not going to bother saving it. I'm just, demonstrating. Then we hit bake again. You see it cleared up nicely. So you can use a cage, but I'm not going to go over that. It will still be pretty much the same as a selected to active, but use a cage to trap the, the photons or the rays that's doing all the baking, that's doing all the calculating. Okay, that was the selected to active bake method, aka high poly to low poly. Now we move on to the last way to bake that I'm going to show you that you can practice. Now this is the bake from multi-resolution modifier method. And this method only depends on one model. So you don't have to make a copy. And I've made a copy, and just to rename it MRM, and don't worry about the base mesh. So what we need to do first is add some multi-resolution modifier detail. That means scope mode. There's no mirror, anything like that. Just find the multi-resolution modifier right there. And you know something I forgot to say a while back actually, is every time you add a level of subdivision, either through the multi-resolution modifier or the subsurface modifier, your model is going to shrink. And then it will shrink to the point where it won't shrink anymore. It depends on how much subdivision you add. So with the multi-resolution modifier, I'm not going to show everything. Just going to hit subdivide once, subdivide again, subdivide again. And you may want to take your time subdividing and subdivide one more time. So up here, we are seeing the same triangle count as the subsurface modifier. But with the multi-resolution modifier, you can go up and down. I can go down right there, and I can do all this in scope mode. So let's go into scope mode. It should be okay. We shouldn't have any errors. Okay, good. And if I want, I can subdivide it again. Now we're at 635,000 plus vertices. And you notice, yes, you can go into edit mode with your mesh open, using the multi-resolution modifier or the subsurface modifier. Now you notice that when I turn, it seems to get blocky. That's just the viewport in Blender just trying to be more productive and performance friendly. Even though display viewport update is not on. This is just fast navigation. So what kind of details are we going to add to this? We're going to add mesh filter details. So let's go to mesh filter. Going to add random. Going to get in there real good. Reduce the strength way down to 0.02 and just make that just like that. Can you see that? Now maybe that's too little. Let's increase the strength a little bit. Let's try that. Okay, that's better. Now I know you can see that. And this is the fast navigate right there. So you can find whatever value you want for the strength. Now, before you save your project using the multi-resolution modifier, I suggest you lower the viewport levels to 0. You can save it in scope mode, or you can go into object mode and save it as well. And another thing that's good for setting the viewport levels to 0 is this is what you want to set it to bake. Okay, set the levels viewport to 0. Now you can increase it if you want to later on, but right now just set it to 0. So I'm going to go into the UV editing, go into object mode real quick. So you may be wondering, since this model is already UV unwrapped, well, what's going to happen if we go into the UV editor with this level of geometry? Now I did not want 5. I'm just going to stay at 4. So let's go to edit mode, and you see nothing happens. That's because this modifier is not applied. It is not applied. If I was to apply it here in object mode, then yes, all that geometry will show up. All right, so with that said, let us bring down the viewport levels. And we just set up our bake materials. Name this MRM. That's fine, lowercase, doesn't matter. Okay. Now what we want to do is our checklist. Now we choose bake from multi-res. And the only thing you can bake from the multi-resolution modifier is normals and displacement. That's it. So with this on normals, I'm just going to leave it there. And then we want to go to sampling. Now for the normal map, I don't think it really matters, but I'm just going to put it at 1. And this is for the render samples, not the viewport samples. Then we want to find performance. So we want this tile size to match our UV. So this is just 1K. So I'm just going to set this to 1K. Now you can set this higher or lower, depends. Just remember, you want the tile size to match your UV size. And I think that's it. Yeah, bake from multi-res. That's fine. That's fine. And let's hit bake. And there it is. Look at that. This is the bake from multi-resolution modifier. Now it's not showing in no preview because it's not saved. So I'm just going to go up here and save it. And there it pops in. Now to be able to see the normal map, we need a special node. So go to vector and select normal map, not normal. Normal is this. We want the normal map because this node is going to interpret this. And there is something really important that I almost forgot. Well, I didn't forget because I'm going to tell you now. And that is very simple. When you bake your normal map, you're supposed to change the color space to non-color. But you see, I didn't do it. And you saw that it kind of doesn't matter. And that is how you bake from the multi-resolution modifier, at least when it comes to the normal map. And let me turn your attention to something. But first, let me get out of render, material preview. You see the stretching right here. You see how the texture has really bunched up. That depends on the geometry of your model. How close the faces are, how large they are, how small they are, etc., etc. So you want to make sure you keep your faces as even as possible. You see how it stretches here? It's okay like here, and it's really kind of washed out right here. Well, that's because this geometry is larger. You see that difference? So where the faces are relatively even, that's where you get relatively good texture. You see it stretching and washing out right here, and it starts to stretch right here, but not down here.